From the News Channel 5 Network, this is MorningLine with Nick Barris.
Good morning, everyone. Thanks for joining us on MorningLine. I am Nick Barris. It is Tuesday, and we're going to talk legal cases, some high-profile cases, some new developments a lot of folks have questions about, and your chance to call in and ask if you have a question about any of this. Among other things, we're going to talk about recent cases that we've seen, some that we've covered that brought up questions about the castle doctrine. One recent case that we reported on where a father woke up hearing glass breaking, wakes up and finds a strange man standing in the hallway of his apartment right outside his young son's bedroom, at which point I think the man may have walked toward him, however it was, and this individual, the homeowner, had a gun, shot, and you know, I think the individual survived, but shot him several times, and he was taken from the scene. And that is defending your own home. And no criminal charges filed in that case. But how far that castle doctrine, the stand your ground law goes, and the question some people ask after the fact. We've seen cases before where burglars who were shot by the homeowners end up turning around and suing the homeowner. And in some cases winning, but there's only certain circumstances where that comes into play. Most of us, if we're on a jury, someone breaks into your home, you shoot them, and I'm on that jury, I don't have a problem with you shooting them. Not at all. Now, if they're running from your home and you shoot them in the back, yeah, that's a problem. But if you feel at risk and you shoot them in your own home, I got no problem with that whatsoever. What do you think? We're going to talk about some other high-profile cases as well. And to sort through the legal issues of all this is News Channel 5 legal analyst Nick Leonardo. It's good to have you on, sir. How are you? So, I shoot someone in the hallway of my own home because I feel I'm at risk. Can that guy turn around and sue me?
Well, there used to be a statute on point. You know, I haven't seen it really since law school, but if someone is committing a felony on your property or attempting to commit a felony, then there can be no civil liability to, you know, such someone as the homeowner, okay? But, I mean, Tennessee law on self-defense is pretty strong, you know, and in that case, there's no duty to retreat. This gentleman was where he was supposed to be, doing nothing wrong in his home, and it's going to turn on, and all these cases turn on, whether or not there was a belief that there was going to be some sort of imminent or serious bodily injury or death. And of course, imminency is the key. Right. And was it a reasonable belief? Okay, if someone is in your yard, you know, and it's in the middle of the night, shooting them is going to be a much different scenario than if someone's in the hallway of your home. Yeah, great example. And it doesn't really matter if they're in the hallway, whether they're armed or not. I suppose it's what you perceive. But if they're in your house and it's dark, they may not be armed. But if they're in the house, I'm going to shoot them. And I think you're well within your rights. I'm going to shoot them. Now, the difference would be if that individual then sees me, turns, runs out the door, and is taking off, and I step to the door, shoot him in the back. You're in trouble. Wrong. That's right. That's wrong. You can never use deadly force to protect property. And you know, again, in law school, you read all these cases about, you know, people having, you know, guns that, you know, were tied to a trigger on a doorknob or something like that, trying to protect property. And so you're not allowed to use deadly force to protect property. But there is a presumption under Tennessee law that if you use deadly force in a business, a dwelling, or, you know, a home, or a vehicle, and you use that deadly force and you're where you're supposed to be, that use of force was reasonable. There is that presumption in Tennessee law. And it's good that you mentioned that. It's the castle doctrine extends outside of the home into a vehicle too. It's now applying if it's in your car. We've certainly seen plenty of cases of late where there are carjackings. Now, not too many issues, and I keep waiting for this to happen where, you know, someone tries to carjack an individual. And I know they catch you by surprise, but they do the carjacking and the driver pulls a gun and shoots them. Well, and I'm surprised we haven't seen that either. But again, as you said, you know, you catch people by surprise. 9 times out of 10, there's a weapon already pointed at you, so and you don't necessarily have an opportunity to grab your weapon. And you know, I guess you just freeze up and you want to comply to get out of the scenario. But most of it all comes down to self-defense for the most part. What about, though, if you're in a public place and there's someone that you feel as though is threatening you? Is that different than say you're at home? I mean, self-defense is self-defense, I suppose, but the use of deadly force. Well, so let's say that, you know, go back to the Waffle House shooting trial that we covered, okay? While the defendant is sitting in the vehicle, you know, right there, and he looks sort of suspicious, or he may be up to something, obviously you can't, you know, use deadly force in that scenario, but as soon as he walks in there with a firearm, it's, you know, you can use deadly force to not only protect yourself, but also defense of third parties if there's this imminency. Now, if the Waffle House shooter had a knife, maybe a little bit different, okay? I mean, mean, what's the imminency of that threat? I mean, if you have a knife, you got to be pretty close to stab someone, or reasonably close to throw that knife. Okay?
Right.
But a firearm travels 2,200 feet per second, and can, you know, you can be shot in a long distance away from there. So there is the ability to protect, you know, someone. And we saw in a situation, I had a client that worked for Smile Direct Club, and we had the active shooter there, and this individual was a hero and grabbed security guard's gun after they were shot and returned fire to keep the shooter on the outside. Of course, he's in a business, and of course that's very reasonable. And so, you know, a lot of this is going to turn on what was reasonable given the circumstances, the information that individual had at the time.
And self-defense doesn't always work out. Of course, we just had the Dogwood Bar case, okay, where you had the 3 individuals that were stabbed, 2 of them killed. The jury deliberated, I think, for less than 2 hours before finding a guilty verdict in that case. Now, the suspect, now the convict in this case, claimed that he was acting in self-defense when he stabbed these 3 individuals outside the bar. Now, based on the evidence, the jury didn't buy that for an instance. But, you know, I mean, this was a case where he had a knife, and a lot of people are saying, you know, these others, maybe if they were surrounding him, I don't know what the jury thought initially, but, you know, is there a point where, you know, all right, you may feel at risk if maybe you're surrounded by a couple of folks, but to escalate it to the point of taking a knife and stabbing 3 people, they're not armed, they don't have a gun, you're out in the open. What's the difference there?
Well, I mean, again, it's going to turn on this reasonable person.
Okay, yeah,
you know,
reasonable.
So was that a reasonable response? Did you use any more force than was needed to dispel the threat?
Yeah.
Okay,
right.
You know,
so, okay,
and it's a much difference. It's a big difference in if it's your vehicle or your home, okay, versus being at a bar.
Okay, so the kind of, I think that's where you hit on it. Is it reasonable that, did you use far beyond the force you needed to deal with the situation resulting in this kind of damage? You could have done something less. Well, or maybe even escaped somehow and ran away.
Well, or what if this person, there was a fight at a bar and someone pulls out a gun and shoots somebody, right? Is that too much force, you know, if somebody was just using their fist? Now, again, it's going to turn on a reasonable person standard, and my mother, my 39-year-old mother, you know, she's going to be viewed much differently than a 40-year-old man in a circumstance like that. You know, to her, was that threat imminent, and was it a reasonable threat? And to a person that age, I think it could be.
Yeah. These days, more and more people carrying weapons. Do you think we're going to see more cases like this? Or just questions of it and the use of force. We obviously see that scrutinized a lot of the time with regard to police officers. But what about just in general?
Well, I think we're probably going to see more of that now that the General Assembly has passed, you know, this new law, this open carry. We're an open carry state, so I mean that means that you can see people carrying a firearm on their hip, and you can't stop them for that very reason.
Right.
Okay. You know, as long as they're in a place that, and I can't think of many that would not allow for firearms, maybe courthouses or other places like that. But you know, if you see somebody walking down the street with a gun, or you see somebody in Home Depot carrying a gun on their side, I mean, you're going to see more and more of that. And of course, not having to have a concealed weapons permit or any sort of training in a lot of ways, you know, could be a very dangerous thing, and time will tell.
Okay, and you're right. We're going to see more of that. Now, with regard to training and choosing to, my concern is, you know, I don't have a problem with anyone carrying a weapon for self-defense, especially if they're well trained and they have it. But they pull out a gun in a public place to defend themselves, maybe justifiably for use of force of another individual, and they fire rounds and miss that person because they're not trained or they don't know how to handle that kind of stress. Yeah, maybe they had some gun safety courses, but it's way different when you're in a real life situation. And they shoot me instead by accident. Are they in trouble for that?
Oh, yeah. Okay. You're responsible wherever that projectile goes.
Something to think about, because I always worry about that. It would be nice if they're pulling it out to do self-defense and take down the individual who's posing a threat, maybe to them and others. But if they miss?
Well, and if Channel 5 was going to hire security guards, okay, armed security guards, you're not just going to hire, you know, Nick from Whites Creek who's got a firearm. You're going to want somebody that's got some training, because there could be a lot of civil liability, you know, with that person being armed at your facility and you're employing that person and them not having training. So, I mean, I do think that training is very important.
That can be an argument as a defense, because let's face it, law enforcement on occasion sometimes accidentally shoot someone. They obviously are well trained, but that maybe comes with the job. I don't know what kind of litigation they would face.
Well, I mean, there's always, I mean, you can sue a tree in the backyard for the right amount of money.
But I mean, that could be under those circumstances, what happened there may be a police officer.
A lot of what you see with police officers shoot someone is they shot the person they intended to shoot. It was the wrong person versus an innocent third-party bystander that just got hit by a stray bullet.
And that's, as we go to the break, another one of the issues with so many people carrying weapons, which again, I have no problem if it's self-defense, but they end up pulling out their weapon as law enforcement arrives at a scene. They see someone with a gun out. They don't know who the bad guy is.
That's exactly right.
Eesh. All right, that's just something we wanted to touch on because a lot of people had been commenting on that when that case happened. We see more of those. But when we come back, some other things to touch bases, some new laws that are moving through on the books right now that'll change things legally for regard to criminal charges and how that plays out. Also want to ask you some on, as we're sitting here waiting for the judge to come back on whether or not to set bond for one of the suspects in the Caitlin Kaufman case. That was a hearing that was quite interesting last week, a high-profile case where this nurse was shot and killed, what it appears, in a road rage incident a few years back. And Devontae Hill trying to get bond. He never has had one. I want you to explain how everyone's entitled to bond unless it's a capital crime. We'll take some phone calls as well, 737-7587. Back with more, and Nick and your calls right after this.